From secret Michael Jackson musical pitches to cursed production accidents that would make any horror movie jealous, The Crow's journey to the big screen was stranger than fiction. This gothic masterpiece hides bizarre behind-the-scenes secrets involving everything from recycled Princess Bride props to future John Wick directors stepping in as body doubles. The film's dark legacy extends far beyond Brandon Lee's tragic death, weaving a web of peculiar coincidences, supernatural accidents, and Hollywood oddities that seem almost too weird to be true. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about The Crow, 1994. Fact 1. Michael Jackson. Musical madness. Picture this. James O'Barr walks into his very first Hollywood meeting, clutching his dark, deeply personal comic book about death, revenge, and supernatural resurrection. He's expecting serious discussions about how to adapt his gritty story of a murdered musician who comes back from the grave to avenge his fiancée's death. Instead, the studio executives have a completely different vision in mind. They want to turn The Crow into a musical starring Michael Jackson. The Paramount Pictures executives were genuinely serious about this idea, much to O'Barr's shock and horror. They had been watching Jackson's music videos for Bad and Dirty Diana and thought the King of Pop's dark, edgy aesthetic would be perfect for Eric Draven, the film's tragic protagonist. In their minds, Jackson's leather outfits, dramatic lighting, and theatrical performances in those videos captured exactly the gothic atmosphere they wanted for the movie. Plus, since Eric was supposed to be a rock musician, it only made sense to them that the film should feature songs and musical numbers. When the executives explained their musical concept to O'Barr, he initially thought they were joking and started laughing. But as the meeting continued, he realized with growing dismay that these Hollywood decision-makers were completely serious about transforming his deeply personal story of grief and loss into a song and dance spectacle. O'Barr later described his reaction, saying he was terrified that every fight scene would end up looking like something from West Side Story, with gang members breaking into choreographed dance numbers instead of engaging in brutal combat. The comic book creator quickly rejected this bizarre proposal, afraid that a musical adaptation would completely destroy the dark, vengeful tone of his original work. O'Barr had written The Crow as a way to process his own grief after losing his fiancée to a drunk driver, and the idea of turning that pain into upbeat musical entertainment felt deeply wrong to him. Fortunately for fans of the eventual film, this Michael Jackson musical version never made it past that first meeting, allowing director Alex Proyas to create the atmospheric, gothic masterpiece that became a cult classic. Fact 2. The future John Wick director's secret role. When Brandon Lee tragically died during filming in 1993, the production team faced an enormous challenge that would ultimately connect The Crow to one of the biggest action franchises in modern cinema. The man who stepped in to help complete the film was Chad Stahelski, a young stuntman who would later become the mastermind behind the entire John Wick series starring Keanu Reeves. Stahelski had been working as Brandon Lee's stunt double throughout the production, and the two men had developed a close friendship over the 5 years they had known each other. They trained together regularly at the same martial arts academy in Los Angeles, where both had studied under legendary instructor Dan Inosanto. When Lee died with only 8 days of filming remaining, stunt coordinator Jeff Imada reached out to Stahelski because he knew Lee's movements better than anyone else and had a similar physical build and appearance to the late actor. The filmmakers used cutting-edge technology that had never been attempted before in cinema to complete Lee's remaining scenes. They took unused footage of Brandon Lee's face and digitally placed it onto Stahelski's head and body, creating what was essentially the first major use of digital face replacement in Hollywood history. This groundbreaking technique required $8 million of the film's $23 million budget, representing some of the most expensive and advanced special effects work of the early 1990s. The most famous example of this digital wizardry appears in the iconic scene where Eric Draven walks up to a window as the camera looks in from outside. In that memorable shot, viewers are actually watching Chad Stahelski's body with Brandon Lee's face seamlessly placed on top through computer graphics. Stahelski also performed in several other crucial scenes that were filmed entirely in shadows or from behind to hide the fact that it wasn't actually Lee on screen. This experience profoundly shaped Stahelski's approach to filmmaking when he eventually became a director himself. The tragedy on The Crow set made him extremely conscious of firearm safety protocols, which became especially important when he later directed the John Wick films, which feature extensive gun choreography throughout every movie. Fact 3. Ravens replaced crows due to attitude problems. Despite being called The Crow, the film actually features ravens throughout the entire production because real crows turned out to be completely unworkable for a movie set. When animal trainer Larry Madrid was brought on board to handle the bird scenes, he quickly discovered that crows are naturally aggressive toward humans and have terrible attitudes when it comes to following directions or performing on command. Crows simply don't like people very much, and they have a reputation in the animal training world for being stubborn, unpredictable, and sometimes downright hostile when forced to interact with film crews. Unlike many other birds that can be trained to perform specific actions for movies, crows tend to do whatever they want, regardless of what their trainers are trying to get them to accomplish. This made them completely unsuitable for the complex scenes that director Alex Proyas had planned for the film. Madrid decided that ravens would make perfect substitutes because they're much more intelligent than crows and have significantly better temperaments when working with humans. Ravens can actually be trained to follow commands and perform specific actions, making them ideal for the close-up shots and dramatic scenes where the bird needed to interact with the actors or appear at precise moments. The fact that most moviegoers wouldn't be able to tell the difference between a crow and a raven, especially in the dark, moody lighting that dominated the film, made this switch even more practical. The production used only 5 trained ravens for the entire movie, with the main bird being named Magic. These ravens had to be specially trained for the unusual filming conditions because the crow was shot almost entirely at night, which goes against the natural sleeping patterns of these birds. Madrid also had to teach the ravens to fly in artificial rain and wind tunnel conditions, both of which are completely unnatural situations that birds would normally avoid. For the larger flock scenes that appear in the movie, the filmmakers relied on special effects and digital trickery rather than trying to coordinate dozens of real birds. This combination of a few well-trained ravens for close-ups and special effects for wide shots allowed the production to create the illusion of crows throughout the film without dealing with the behavioral problems that actual crows would have caused. Fact 4. The cursed voicemail warning. Before the cast and crew of The Crow even arrived in Wilmington, North Carolina to begin filming in 1993, someone left a chilling voicemail message that would later seem like an eerie prophecy of the disasters to come. The mysterious caller warned the production team that bad things would happen if they went ahead with making the movie, setting an ominous tone before cameras ever started rolling. Nobody ever discovered who left this threatening message or how they got access to the production office phone number, but the warning proved to be disturbingly accurate as a series of accidents and mishaps plagued the filming from the very first day. The voicemail became part of the growing legend surrounding the crow's so-called curse, especially after the tragic events that followed seemed to fulfill the anonymous caller's dark prediction. When filmmakers and crew members first heard about the voicemail, most dismissed it as either a prank call or the work of someone who disapproved of the violent content in the movie. Horror and action films often attract criticism from various groups, so receiving negative messages wasn't entirely unusual for Hollywood productions. However, as accidents began piling up during filming, the mysterious warning started to feel much more sinister and meaningful to everyone involved in the production. The timing of the voicemail made it even more unsettling because it arrived before any major publicity about the film had been released, suggesting that whoever made the call had inside knowledge about the project or had been specifically tracking the production's progress. This detail added an extra layer of mystery to an already strange situation, making crew members wonder if someone with access to confidential information was trying to sabotage the movie or genuinely believed that supernatural forces were at work. The voicemail became one of the key pieces of evidence that believers in the Crow curse would point to when discussing the film's troubled production. Whether the caller was someone with genuine psychic abilities, a disgruntled insider trying to scare the crew, or just a random person making threats, their warning proved to be frighteningly accurate as the production encountered one disaster after another throughout the filming process. Fact 5. First day electrician lost both ears. The Crow's reputation as a cursed production began on the very first day of filming when a horrific accident left one crew member permanently disfigured and fighting for his life. An electrician was operating a cherry picker crane to set up lighting equipment when the machine accidentally backed into high-voltage power lines, sending thousands of volts of electricity coursing through his body and catching him on fire. The 26-year-old worker suffered second- and third-degree burns across large portions of his body, with the electrical current causing such severe damage that doctors had to amputate both of his ears to save his life. Eyewitnesses described the terrifying scene as the man was literally lifted up in the cherry picker when it made contact with the electrical pole, creating a circuit that turned him into a human conductor for the deadly current flowing through the power lines. Emergency crews rushed the electrician to the hospital, where medical staff worked frantically to treat his extensive injuries and prevent his organs from shutting down completely. The electrical burns had damaged his internal organs so severely that doctors weren't sure he would survive the initial trauma, and his wife, who was pregnant at the time, faced the possibility of losing her husband on what should have been an exciting day, marking the start of a major Hollywood production. According to veteran actor John Polito, who witnessed the accident, it was a narrow escape from death that left everyone on set shaken and questioning whether they should continue with the filming. The incident created an atmosphere of fear and superstition among the cast and crew, especially when combined with the mysterious voicemail warning that had arrived before production began. Medical professionals told the man's family that he would need years of recovery and would never be completely normal again, with the electrical damage leaving permanent effects throughout his body. The accident served as a devastating opening to what would become one of Hollywood's most troubled productions, and many crew members later pointed to this first-day disaster as proof that something supernatural was working against the film from the very beginning of the shooting schedule. Fact 6. The Princess Bride sword cameo. When villain Top Dollar pulls out his elegant rapier for the climactic sword fight with Eric Draven on the cathedral rooftop, movie fans are actually looking at one of the most famous weapons in cinema history. The sword that Michael Wincott's character wields during this final battle is the exact same prop that was used as the six-fingered sword in The Princess Bride, the legendary weapon that Count Rugen carried throughout that beloved 1987 fairy tale adventure. In The Princess Bride, this distinctive rapier belonged to the six-fingered man who killed Inigo Montoya's father, making it the central focus of one of the most quotable revenge stories ever filmed. The sword's unique design and ornate handle made it instantly recognizable to fans of that earlier movie, though most viewers watching The Crow probably didn't notice the connection during the intense rooftop fight scene between Eric and Top Dollar. Hollywood prop departments often reuse weapons and equipment from previous productions to save money and time, especially when the items are high-quality pieces that can work well in multiple different films. The six-fingered sword was apparently impressive enough and in good enough condition that the prop masters for The Crow decided it would be perfect for their main villain's weapon of choice during the movie's climactic battle sequence. This reuse of props creates an interesting connection between two very different revenge stories, even though The Princess Bride was a lighthearted adventure with comedic elements while The Crow dealt with much darker themes of death and supernatural vengeance. Both films featured characters seeking to avenge the deaths of loved ones, so having the same sword appear in both movies adds an unintentional layer of meaning to the weapon's appearances. The sword's journey from Count Rugen's hands to Top Dollar's grip represents a fascinating piece of movie trivia that connects two cult classic films from different decades. For fans who recognize the weapon in both movies, seeing the six-fingered sword again adds an extra element of recognition and nostalgia to The Crow's already memorable final confrontation between hero and villain. Fact 7. Stone Temple Pilots' death song dilemma. Stone Temple Pilots faced an incredibly awkward situation when Brandon Lee's tragic death forced them to completely reconsider their contribution to the Crow soundtrack, ultimately scrapping a song with an uncomfortably prophetic title. The band had originally planned to re-record an early demo called Only Dying that they had written during their time as Mighty Joe Young, back before they became famous under their current name. Only Dying was a moody, jazz-influenced track that the band had created about 9 months after guitarist Dean DeLeo joined the group, and they recorded the original demo in a small studio in North Hollywood before they even had a record deal. The song featured different chord progressions than their usual style and represented a more experimental direction for the band, with bassist Robert DeLeo describing it as being based on jazz-type chordings that were meant to spark the band into exploring new musical territories. When Brandon Lee died in the accidental shooting on set, the band immediately realized that releasing a song literally titled Only Dying would be incredibly inappropriate and insensitive given the circumstances. Producer Jeff Most later described the original track as a darkly satiric song that mocked death, which made it completely unsuitable for a soundtrack dedicated to an actor who had just lost his life in a tragic accident. Instead of proceeding with Only Dying, Stone Temple Pilots quickly pivoted and submitted Big Empty, a song that would eventually become one of their biggest hits and serve as the lead single from their second album, Purple. The band felt that Big Empty had a more fitting tone for the film and the tragic situation surrounding its completion, offering a different emotional vibe that better matched what everyone was feeling at the time. Only Dying remained unreleased for decades until Stone Temple Pilots finally included it on the 25th anniversary reissue of their debut album Core in 2017. Even then, the song served as a reminder of how Brandon Lee's death had affected everyone connected to the Crow production, including musicians who had to make difficult decisions about their artistic contributions to honor the fallen actor's memory. Fact 8. Makeup inspired by London theatre marionette. For decades, fans and critics have assumed that Eric Draven's distinctive white face paint with black accents around the eyes was directly inspired by famous rock stars like Alice Cooper or the members of Kiss, given the character's background as a rock musician and the theatrical nature of his appearance. However, comic book creator James O'Barr has revealed that the iconic makeup design actually came from a completely different and much more unexpected source that had nothing to do with heavy metal or shock rock performances. O'Barr discovered the inspiration for Eric's face paint during a trip to London, where he spotted a marionette mask displayed on a sign outside a theater. The puppet's painted face featured the stark white base with dramatic black markings around the eyes that would later become Eric Draven's signature look, creating a haunting and otherworldly appearance that perfectly captured the character's supernatural status as someone who had returned from the dead. The marionette mask appealed to O'Barr because it had an ethereal, ghostly quality that seemed appropriate for a character who existed somewhere between life and death. Unlike the aggressive, rebellious energy associated with rock star makeup, the puppet's painted face suggested something more mysterious and melancholy, which better matched the tragic nature of Eric's story and his quest for vengeance from beyond the grave. This theatrical origin for the makeup design makes perfect sense when considering the broader influences on the Crow comic and film, both of which drew heavily from Gothic literature, classical drama, and other forms of traditional storytelling, rather than contemporary music culture. The marionette connection also adds an element of puppetry and control to Eric's character, suggesting that he might be guided by forces beyond his understanding as he carries out his supernatural mission. O'Barr's revelation about the London theatre marionette corrects a long-standing misconception about one of the most recognizable visual elements in The Crow, showing how the character's iconic appearance emerged from high art and classical theater traditions rather than the world of rock and roll that many people assumed had influenced the design. Fact 9. Brandon Lee applied his own makeup while sleeping. Brandon Lee was such a perfectionist about Eric Draven's iconic appearance that he came up with an unusual solution when the professional makeup department couldn't achieve the weathered, distressed look he wanted for his character's face paint. Lee felt that the makeup artists were making Eric's white and black face paint look too clean and fresh, which didn't match his vision of a character who had crawled out of a grave and been wandering through the rain-soaked streets of Detroit seeking revenge. The makeup department's work looked too polished and theatrical for Lee's taste, lacking the worn, damaged quality that would make Eric appear as though he had truly been through hell and back. Lee wanted the face paint to look like it had been applied days earlier, and then subjected to weather, violence, and the general wear and tear of a supernatural being on a mission of vengeance, rather than something that had just been carefully applied in a professional makeup trailer. After discussing the problem with director Alex Proyas, they came up with a creative and unconventional solution that would give the makeup exactly the authentic, distressed appearance that Lee was looking for. Instead of having the makeup team apply fresh face paint each morning before filming, Lee would put on the white and black makeup himself before going to bed each night, then sleep in it so that it would naturally become smudged, faded, and worn-looking by the time he arrived on set the next day. This overnight aging process created the perfect weathered effect that Lee had been seeking, with the makeup developing natural creases, smears, and imperfections that couldn't be replicated through artificial distressing techniques. The face paint would shift and wear against his pillow and bed sheets throughout the night, creating authentic-looking damage that made Eric appear as though he had been wearing the same makeup for days without touching it up. Lee's dedication to getting every detail of his character's appearance exactly right demonstrates the level of commitment he brought to the role of Eric Draven, going so far as to sacrifice comfortable sleep in order to achieve the precise visual effect that would make his performance more believable and compelling for audiences. Fact 10. Comic creator donated millions as blood money. James O'Barr made a decision that shocked Hollywood when he gave away nearly all of his substantial earnings from the Crow film adaptation, keeping only enough money to buy his mother a car and purchase a surround sound system for himself before donating the rest to charity. O'Barr explained his reasoning by saying that the money felt like blood money to him after Brandon Lee's tragic death during production, and he couldn't bring himself to profit from what he saw as a tragedy that had claimed the life of someone he considered a close friend. The comic book creator had developed a genuine friendship with Brandon Lee during the pre-production and filming process, and Lee's death hit him much harder than most people realized at the time. O'Barr had initially been hesitant about casting Lee in the role because he had only seen him in action films like Showdown in Little Tokyo, and worried that The Crow might turn into a straightforward kung fu movie rather than the dark, emotional story he had envisioned. However, O'Barr's opinion completely changed when he met Lee on set wearing the full Eric Draven makeup and costume, and he was amazed when the actor spoke lines directly from the comic book with perfect understanding of the character's emotional depth and complexity. This experience convinced O'Barr that Lee truly understood the heart of the story and was the right person to bring Eric Draven to life on screen. After Lee's death, O'Barr felt that keeping the substantial financial windfall from the film's success would be morally wrong, especially since the movie's cult status and commercial appeal were largely due to Lee's powerful performance and the tragic circumstances surrounding his death. O'Barr kept his charitable donations secret for as long as possible, explaining later that he believed charity shouldn't be done for public recognition or credit. The comic creator's decision to give away his earnings demonstrates the deep sense of guilt and responsibility he felt about the connection between his creation and Brandon Lee's death, even though the accident was completely beyond his control and not related to the content of his original story. Fact 11. Michael Massee never watched the finished film. Michael Massee, the actor who played Funboy and accidentally fired the prop gun that killed Brandon Lee, was so traumatized by the incident that he took an entire year off from acting and reportedly never watched the completed version of The Crow during his lifetime. Even though investigations cleared him of any wrongdoing and confirmed that the accident was caused by a series of prop department mistakes rather than anything he did wrong, Massee carried the emotional burden of Lee's death for the rest of his career. The tragic shooting occurred when Massee was supposed to fire a blank round at Lee from a distance of 12 to 15 feet during a flashback scene where Eric and Shelley are murdered in their apartment. Unknown to anyone on set, a dummy bullet tip had been left lodged in the gun barrel from a previous scene, and when the blank was fired, it propelled the bullet fragment with enough force to fatally wound Lee. After the accident, Massee disappeared from Hollywood for a full year, unable to cope with the guilt and trauma of having been the person who pulled the trigger, even though he had no way of knowing that the weapon was dangerous. When he finally returned to acting, his first role was a small part in the 1995 thriller C7, but the incident continued to haunt him throughout his career. In 2005, 12 years after Brandon Lee's death, Massee gave his first and only interview about the incident to the television show Extra. He explained that Lee's death had become part of the fabric of his life and described it as a very personal matter that he preferred not to discuss publicly. Massee revealed that he still suffered from nightmares about the shooting and had dealt with the emotional aftermath privately by speaking directly with Lee's fiancée and mother, rather than seeking media attention. Massee passed away from cancer in 2016, and according to multiple sources, he had never brought himself to watch the finished version of The Crow, unable to see the film that had forever changed his life and ended the promising career of a fellow actor he had been working alongside. Fact 12. Hurricane destroyed sets during production. Just when the cast and crew of The Crow thought they had survived the worst of their production troubles, a powerful hurricane swept through Wilmington, North Carolina, and destroyed large portions of the elaborate backlot sets that had taken weeks to construct. The storm struck during filming and obliterated several key outdoor locations that the production team had spent significant time and money building to create the dark, gothic atmosphere of the fictional Detroit setting. The hurricane's destruction came at a particularly difficult time for the production, which was already dealing with numerous accidents, injuries, and safety concerns that had plagued the filming process from the very first day. When crew members arrived on set after the storm passed, they found that the powerful winds and flooding had damaged or completely destroyed set pieces that would be expensive and time-consuming to rebuild, potentially derailing the entire filming schedule. The timing of the hurricane felt especially ominous to cast and crew members who were already nervous about the series of strange accidents and mishaps that had occurred throughout the production. Coming on top of the mysterious warning voicemail, the first-day electrocution, and various other incidents involving injuries to stunt performers and crew members, the natural disaster seemed like yet another sign that supernatural forces were working against the film. For many people involved in the production, the hurricane represented a turning point where the idea of a curse surrounding the Crow began to feel more real and threatening, rather than just a series of unfortunate coincidences. The storm's destruction of the sets created both practical problems that needed immediate solutions and psychological pressure on everyone working on the film, as they wondered what other disasters might be waiting for them. The production team had to quickly assess the damage and determine which sets could be repaired, which needed to be completely rebuilt, and whether they could modify their filming plans to work around the destruction. This additional stress and expense added another layer of difficulty to what was already becoming one of Hollywood's most troubled productions, even before the tragic accident that would claim Brandon Lee's life and cement The Crow's reputation as a cursed film. Fact 13. The cut Skull Cowboy character. Michael Berryman, the distinctive character actor known for his appearances in horror films like The Hills Have Eyes, filmed multiple scenes as a mysterious character called the Skull Cowboy, who was supposed to serve as Eric Draven's supernatural spirit guide throughout his journey of revenge. This otherworldly figure was meant to explain the rules and limitations of Eric's resurrection, helping both the character and the audience understand how his newfound powers worked and what he needed to accomplish before he could find peace. The Skull Cowboy was designed to be a crucial part of the film's mythology, appearing at key moments to offer Eric advice and guidance as he navigated his return from the dead. In the original script, this character would have provided important exposition about the Crow's role in bringing people back to life and the conditions that Eric needed to fulfill in order to complete his mission and move on to the afterlife. Berryman's character was supposed to appear in scenes where Eric needed clarification about his supernatural abilities or encouragement to continue his quest for vengeance. The Skull Cowboy would have explained things like why Eric could heal from most injuries, how the Crow served as his connection to the spirit world, and what would happen once he had successfully avenged the deaths of himself and his fiancée Shelley. However, when director Alex Proyas and the production team reviewed the footage of Berryman in his elaborate Skull Cowboy costume and makeup, they realized that the character's appearance completely clashed with the dark, gothic aesthetic they had carefully established throughout the rest of the film. The costume and visual design of the Skull Cowboy felt out of place compared to the urban, industrial look of the movie's Detroit setting and the sleek, dramatic appearance of Eric Draven himself. Rather than try to redesign the character or reshoot the scenes with a different approach, the filmmakers made the decision to cut all of the Skull Cowboy sequences entirely from the finished film. This choice was made before Brandon Lee's death, meaning that the character's removal was purely an artistic decision rather than something forced by the production's later troubles and the need to complete the movie without its star. Fact 14. Mayer's grocery kindness inspired iconic, quote, one of the Crow's most memorable and frequently quoted lines, "It can't rain all the time," came from a real-life act of kindness that James O'Barr experienced during one of the most difficult periods of his life while he was struggling financially and working on his comic book. O'Barr found himself in a grocery store in Shefford, Michigan, unable to afford the groceries he needed and feeling frustrated about his dire financial situation. When O'Barr reached the checkout counter, he realized he didn't have enough money to pay for all of his groceries and made the embarrassing decision to put most items back, keeping only a bag of rice because it was cheap and would provide basic sustenance for several days. This moment represented the low point of his financial struggles as he tried to make ends meet while pouring his time and energy into creating the Crow comic as a way to process his grief over losing his fiancée. The man standing in line behind O'Barr at the grocery store witnessed this sad scene and decided to step in with an act of unexpected generosity. He told O'Barr, "You can't eat rice all the time," and then paid for all of the groceries that the struggling comic creator had been forced to put back on the shelves, covering the entire cost without asking for anything in return. O'Barr later discovered that this kind stranger was Lee Coughlin, who happened to be the mayor of Shefford, Michigan. This random encounter with a public official who chose to help someone in need left a lasting impression on O'Barr. Not only because of the immediate practical help with his grocery bill, but also because of the mayor's compassionate words about not being able to survive on rice alone. The mayor's simple but profound statement about the need for variety and hope in life inspired Obar to transform "you can't eat rice all the time" into the more poetic and universally applicable "can't rain all the time." This phrase became one of the central themes of The Crow, representing the idea that even in the darkest periods of life, there must eventually be moments of light and relief from suffering. Fact 15. Digital face replacement pioneering technology. The Crow became a groundbreaking film in cinema history, not just for its gothic storytelling, but also for pioneering digital face replacement technology that had never been successfully attempted on such a large scale in Hollywood before 1994. When Brandon Lee died with only 8 days of filming remaining, the production team faced an unprecedented technical challenge that required them to invent entirely new methods of completing a movie without its lead actor. Miramax Pictures stepped in after Paramount dropped the project and invested $8 million of the film's total $23 million budget specifically for the cutting-edge computer graphics work needed to finish Lee's remaining scenes. This represented more than 1/3 of the entire production cost and was an enormous financial gamble on technology that had never been proven to work effectively in a major motion picture. The special effects team had to develop revolutionary techniques for taking unused footage of Brandon Lee's face and digitally placing it onto the head and body of his stunt double, Chad Stahelski, creating seamless shots that would convince audiences they were still watching Lee's performance. This process required frame-by-frame manipulation of the digital imagery, with computer artists carefully matching lighting, shadows, and facial expressions to make the replacement appear completely natural. The technology was so new and experimental that the effects team essentially had to invent the entire process as they worked, creating the foundation for digital face replacement techniques that would later become standard practice in Hollywood. The success of this work on The Crow proved that computer graphics could be used to solve seemingly impossible production problems and opened the door for future films to use similar technology. The most famous example of this digital wizardry appears in the scene where Eric Draven approaches a window, with the camera looking in from outside as he walks forward. In that memorable shot, audiences are actually watching Chad Stahelski's body with Brandon Lee's face perfectly placed on top through computer graphics, creating a haunting final performance that preserved Lee's portrayal of the character while allowing the film to reach completion and serve as a lasting tribute to the actor's talent.